When Pete Wilson discovers a wallet in the rain, he faces the toughest choice of his life. Inside is $2,000 cash and a driver's license belonging to Michael Jordan. For a man who hasn't eaten in days, that money could mean survival. But Pete's mother taught him to do what's right, even when it's challenging. Little does Pete realize that returning this wallet will trigger a series of events that will change his life in unimaginable ways, and reveal a connection to his past that feels almost too perfect to be mere coincidence. Pete Wilson tightened his thin jacket as the cold rain seeped through to his skin. The small spot under the bridge wasn't much, but at least it kept the worst of the weather at bay. 8 months on the streets had shown him where to find shelter when the sky turned angry. "Happy birthday to me," Pete whispered, his breath forming little clouds in the brisk morning air. Today he turned 42, with no one to celebrate with. Not that birthdays meant much anymore when you were just trying to survive. Each day, special occasions didn't seem so special. Pete reached into his plastic bag and pulled out half a sandwich he'd saved from the church handout yesterday. His stomach growled, pleading for more, but he broke the sandwich in two anyway. Old habits die hard. "Morning, Ray," Pete called to the thin man limping toward him. Ray had a bad foot that never healed properly. "Got something for you?" Ray's face brightened at the sight of food. "Pete, you're a good man. You don't need to share your breakfast." "It's just a sandwich," Pete replied with a shrug. "Besides, my mama always said sharing makes the food taste better." The two men ate in silence, watching the rain form puddles on the cracked pavement. When they finished, Ray pulled out a crumpled newspaper from inside his coat. "Found this dry too. Thought you might like the sports section." Pete smiled. "Thanks, friend." Before becoming homeless, Pete loved reading about basketball. He had been quite good at it himself. Once upon a time, now reading the scores and stats felt like visiting an old neighborhood, familiar and comforting. After Ray left to check the dumpsters behind the grocery store, Pete gathered his few belongings. He needed to get to the recycling center early if he wanted to turn in his cans before the line grew too long. $5 wouldn't seem like much to most people, but to Pete, it meant a hot meal. The rain slowed to a drizzle as Pete walked through the quiet street. Most people were still asleep in their warm beds. Pete tried not to dwell on that, on beds with clean sheets and roofs that didn't leak. Thinking about what you lacked only made things harder. Instead, he focused on his plan for the day. First, the recycling center. Then maybe the library to get warm and dry. The librarian, Miss Chen, was kind and never rushed him out like some places did. Sometimes she even saved old magazines for him. As Pete crossed through Jefferson Park, he noticed how the spring rain had made the grass extra green. Little things like that still brought him joy. The park was empty this early, with puddles dotting the walking paths and dripping from the playground equipment. That's when Pete spotted it, something dark and square lying in a puddle near a bench. At first, he thought it might be a small book, but as he got closer, he realized it was a wallet, a very expensive-looking wallet. Pete looked around. No one was there. He picked up the wallet carefully, wiping away the rainwater with his sleeve. The leather felt soft and smooth, unlike the cheap wallets sold at discount stores. "Hello," Pete called out. "Did anyone lose something?" Only the chirping birds answered him. Pete hesitated. He should probably turn it in somewhere, but who would believe a homeless man found a wallet and didn't steal from it? Most people crossed the street when they saw him coming. Curiosity got the better of him. Pete opened the wallet to look for ID, hoping to find the owner's name. His eyes widened when he saw the driver's license photo. "No way," he whispered. Pete blinked hard, making sure his eyes weren't deceiving him, but the face on the license didn't change. The wallet belonged to Michael Jordan. The Michael Jordan. Pete had watched him play basketball for years. Even at the shelter, when they got to watch TV, everyone cheered for MJ. He was a legend. With trembling hands, Pete looked through the rest of the wallet. Credit cards, business cards, and cash. More cash than Pete had seen in a long time. At least $2,000. Pete's mind raced. $2,000 could change everything for him. A place to stay for a while, new clothes for job interviews, real food, medicines for his cough that wouldn't go away. For a moment, Pete allowed himself to picture what that would be like. To sleep in a real bed again, to shower whenever he wanted, to not be hungry. The rain started falling harder, making splashes in the puddles around his worn-out shoes. Pete closed the wallet and slipped it into his inner jacket pocket, the one with the zipper that still worked. Some decisions needed time, and this was the biggest decision Pete Wilson had faced in a long time. Pete found a dry bench under a large oak tree and sat down. His hands trembled as he took out the wallet again. "This isn't just a wallet," Pete whispered to himself. "This belongs to Michael Jordan." Pete opened it carefully as if it might break. The driver's license showed that familiar face, the man Pete had watched soar through the air on TV screens at the shelter, the same man whose basketball games had given Pete something to look forward to during the darkest days of his life. The cash was neatly arranged, all $100 bills. $2,000. Pete ran his thumb across the money, feeling the crisp paper. This much cash. He could get a motel room for a couple of weeks, buy new clothes, eat real meals instead of digging through dumpsters. Maybe even see a doctor about the pain in his chest that kept getting worse. Nobody would know. A small voice in his head whispered, "He's rich. He wouldn't even miss this money." Pete's stomach growled loudly, reminding him that half a sandwich wasn't much of a breakfast. When was the last time he'd eaten a full meal? 3 days ago? 4? He kept looking through the wallet. There were platinum credit cards, business cards with important names, and a few family photos. One showed Michael Jordan with his arms around 2 young boys, all of them laughing. Another was of an older woman with the same smile, probably his mother. Pete slipped the photos out and examined them more closely. Happy faces, a family that loved each other. It reminded Pete of when he had a family too, before they all drifted apart. What would Mom say if she could see me now? Pete wondered aloud. He already knew the answer. Sheila Wilson had raised her son with one rule above all others: do what's right even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Pete remembered being 10 years old, finding a $20 bill on the sidewalk outside the grocery store. He'd been so excited, already planning what candy he'd buy, but his mother had made him turn it in to the store manager. "But Mom, finders keepers," he'd protested. "Peter James Wilson," she'd said firmly, "how would you feel if you lost your birthday money and nobody returned it?" Doing the right thing isn't about what other people deserve. It's about who you choose to be. The memory was so vivid it made Pete's chest ache. His mom had been gone for 12 years now, but he could still hear her voice clearly. Pete looked at the sky. The rain had stopped, and patches of blue were appearing between the clouds. People were beginning to enter the park: joggers, dog walkers, and parents with strollers. Normal people with normal lives. I could be normal again, Pete thought, his fingers tightening around the wallet. But another thought kept intruding. What kind of normal would that be? Starting over with stolen money? Pete sighed deeply. He knew what he had to do, what his mother would expect him to do, what he would expect from himself if he were still the man he used to be. He carefully put everything back in the wallet, exactly as he had found it. Then he pulled out one of the business cards. It showed the logo of a fancy hotel downtown, the Grand Palmer. Under the logo was a handwritten note: "Meeting in lobby 7 p.m. That's where I'll find him, Pete decided. It would be a long walk across town, at least 5 miles. His shoes had holes in them, and his bad knee would be screaming by the time he got there. The hotel staff would probably call security the moment they saw him approaching the entrance. They might not even believe his story. None of that changed what was right. Pete tucked the wallet safely back into his inner pocket and zipped it closed. Then he stood up, wincing at the pain in his knee, and began walking toward downtown. His empty stomach protested with every step, reminding him of what he was giving up. $2,000. Food, shelter, medicine. "Shut up, stomach," Pete muttered. "We're doing this." As he walked, Pete rehearsed what he would say when he met Michael Jordan. Should he just hand over the wallet and leave? Should he explain how he found it? Would Michael Jordan even talk to someone like him? Doesn't matter, Pete decided. I'm not doing this for a reward or a thank you. I'm doing it because it's right. The journey would take most of the day. Pete stopped at a public water fountain to get a drink, trying to silence his hungry stomach. He thought about stopping at the shelter for lunch, but if he did, he might not make it to the hotel before evening. Better to keep going. As Pete walked through fancier and fancier neighborhoods, people gave him strange looks. Some crossed the street to avoid him. He was used to it by now, being invisible or unwanted. But today, with Michael Jordan's wallet in his pocket, Pete walked with his head held high. I might be homeless, he thought, but I still know right from wrong, still have my dignity. And right now, that felt worth more than $2,000. The sun climbed higher as Pete made his way downtown. His worn sneakers rubbed against his heel, creating a blister that stung with every step. But Pete kept walking. As the neighborhoods became fancier, the buildings grew taller. Pete felt smaller and smaller. When was the last time he'd been downtown? 6 months ago? Back then, he'd been looking for work, going from place to place, until security guards started watching him too closely. One foot in front of the other, Pete told himself, as he passed a restaurant where people sat outside eating lunch. The smell of burgers made his empty stomach twist painfully. He picked up his pace. By early afternoon, the temperature had risen, and Pete's damp clothes stuck to his skin. He stopped at a public park to rest his aching knee and refill his plastic water bottle at a drinking fountain. An older woman sitting on a nearby bench clutched her purse tighter when she saw him. Pete pretended not to notice. He was used to it by now, the way people looked through him, or worse, looked at him with fear or disgust. Sometimes Pete felt like he wasn't even human anymore in their eyes. Just another couple miles, he told himself, checking that the wallet was still secure in his inner pocket. As Pete approached the downtown area, the sidewalks became more crowded. Men and women in business suits rushed past, talking on phones or to each other. No one made eye contact with the limping homeless man. A police officer watched Pete from across the street. Pete kept his head down and continued walking. He hadn't done anything wrong, but that didn't always matter when you looked like he did. His knee throbbed badly now. Pete found a concrete planter to sit on for a moment. He stretched his leg, wincing at the sharp pain, an old basketball injury that never healed properly. One of the many ways life had taken an unexpected turn. Pete pulled out the business card again and checked the address of the Grand Palmer Hotel. Only 15 more blocks to go. He could make it before dark if he kept a steady pace. As he neared the hotel district, the buildings seemed to reach all the way to the clouds. Pete felt dizzy looking up at them. Everything was shiny. The windows, the cars, even the sidewalks seemed cleaner. People's shoes clicked importantly on the pavement. Pete looked down at his own worn sneakers held together with duct tape on one side. The difference between his world and theirs couldn't have been more obvious. A memory flashed through Pete's mind. Him wearing dress shoes that clicked on floors like these, heading to an interview at a car factory years ago. How proud he'd been to get that job. How devastated when the factory closed. Stop it, Pete muttered to himself. No use thinking about what's gone. The afternoon sun reflected off the glass buildings, making Pete squint. His throat was dry despite the water he'd drunk earlier. Each step sent pain shooting from his knee up his leg. 3 more blocks to go. Pete's pace had slowed to a shuffle. A group of teenagers passed him, one of them holding his nose dramatically. The others laughed. Pete kept his eyes on the sidewalk. Finally, he saw it. The Grand Palmer Hotel. The building stretched at least 30 stories high, with a fancy entrance where men in red uniforms opened car doors for guests. A man stood at attention wearing white gloves and a serious expression. Pete stopped across the street, suddenly unsure. How was he supposed to just walk in there? Would they even let him through the door? The wallet felt heavy in his pocket. Maybe I should just leave it with the doorman, Pete thought. But what if the doorman didn't believe him? What if they thought he stole it? Or what if the wallet didn't make it back to Michael Jordan? Pete took a deep breath and crossed the street. His heart pounded in his chest as he approached the gleaming entrance with its gold revolving doors. The doorman's eyes narrowed as Pete got closer. He stepped forward, blocking the entrance. "Can I help you?" he asked in a tone that made it clear Pete wasn't welcome. "I need to see Michael Jordan," Pete said, his voice scratchy from thirst. "I found his wallet." The doorman's expression didn't change. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to move along." "But I really did find his wallet," Pete insisted, reaching toward his jacket pocket. "Sir!" The doorman's voice hardened. "Do not reach into your pockets. Please leave the premises immediately." Pete saw 2 security guards watching from inside the lobby. One of them spoke into a radio clipped to his shoulder. "Please," Pete tried again. "I walked all the way across town. The wallet has $2,000 in it. I just want to return it. The doorman shook his head. I've heard every story in the book. Now please move along before we have to call the police. Pete's shoulders slumped. All this way for nothing. The security guards were moving toward the door now. Just then, a sleek black car pulled up to the entrance. The driver got out and opened the back door. Pete's heart nearly stopped when he saw who stepped out. Michael Jordan in person, even taller than Pete had imagined. Without thinking, Pete called out, "Mr. Jordan! Mr. Jordan! I found your wallet!" Michael Jordan turned toward the sound of Pete's voice. The security guards were already moving to block Pete, but something made Michael raise his hand to stop them. "Hold on a minute," Michael said, his deep voice carrying across the space between them. "What did you say?" Pete's heart raced in his chest. He couldn't believe Michael Jordan was actually looking at him, talking to him. "Your wallet, sir," Pete said, his voice shaking a little. "I found it in Jefferson Park this morning." Michael's expression shifted from curiosity to surprise. He patted his jacket pocket, then checked his other pockets. The realization crossed his face. He hadn't even noticed his wallet was missing. "Let him through," Michael told the security guards, who stepped aside reluctantly. Pete limped forward, painfully aware of his dirty clothes and unshaven face. He unzipped his inner pocket with trembling fingers and carefully pulled out the leather wallet. "I didn't take anything from it," Pete said quickly. "Everything's still there. The money, the cards, the pictures." Michael took the wallet, studying Pete's face. "You walked all the way here to return this to me?" Pete nodded. "The address was on your business card." Michael opened the wallet and looked inside. The cash was untouched. All $100 bills. His credit cards were in place. Even the family photos were exactly as he'd left them. "What's your name?" Michael asked. "Pete. Pete Wilson." "Well, Pete Wilson. Most people would have kept this money." Pete looked down at his worn-out shoes. "I thought about it," he admitted. "I really did." "What stopped you?" Pete was quiet for a moment. "My mom always said, doing the right thing isn't about what other people deserve. It's about who you choose to be." He shrugged. "I guess I'm still trying to be the man she raised." Michael studied Pete more carefully, taking in his ragged appearance, the plastic bag containing all his belongings, the exhaustion in his eyes. "When's the last time you ate, Pete?" Pete tried to remember. "Had half a sandwich yesterday morning." Michael shook his head, seeming to make a decision. He turned to one of the men who had arrived with him. "Tony, we're going to be a little late to that meeting." The man checked his watch. "But, sir, the interns, they can wait," Michael said firmly. He turned back to Pete. "I'd like to buy you dinner if that's okay." Pete blinked in surprise. "Dinner with you?" Michael nodded. "Least I can do for the man who returned my wallet." The doorman and security guards exchanged confused looks as Michael Jordan led a homeless man through the grand lobby of the Grand Palmer Hotel. Pete tried not to stare at the crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and fancy furniture. It was like stepping into another world. People turned to look at Michael, then at Pete walking beside him. Pete heard their whispers, saw their shocked expressions. He wanted to disappear, but Michael acted like nothing was unusual, guiding Pete toward the hotel restaurant. "Sir," the restaurant host said nervously, eyeing Pete's dirty clothes, "perhaps the private dining room would be more appropriate?" "That would be perfect," Michael agreed, understanding the situation. "And could you send someone to the gift shop for some clean clothes? Size?" He looked at Pete questioningly. "Large," Pete said quietly, feeling his face grow hot with embarrassment. "And, size 11 shoes?" As they waited for the clothes, Michael ordered food. Lots of it. Pete's mouth watered at the smell of fresh bread the waiter brought to the table. "Go ahead," Michael encouraged. "You must be starving." Pete tried to eat slowly, to remember his manners, but he was so hungry. The bread was the best thing he'd tasted in months. When the main courses arrived, steak, potatoes, vegetables, Pete almost cried. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen so much food on one plate. "Thank you," Pete said between bites. "This is... I don't even have words." Michael smiled. "My pleasure. Now tell me about yourself, Pete Wilson. What's your story?" Pete sat down, his fork suddenly self-conscious. "Not much to tell. Used to work at the auto factory over in West Side. Got laid off when they closed it down. Couldn't find steady work after that. Unemployment ran out. Then the rent was due, and he gestured at himself, the explanation clear. One thing had led to another, and here he was. "You have family?" Michael asked. Pete shook his head. "Mom passed 12 years ago. Dad left when I was little. Had a sister in Ohio, but we lost touch. People get busy with their own lives, you know." Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "And before the factory, what did you do?" "This and that," Pete said vaguely. Some parts of his past were still too painful to discuss. "Worked on cars mostly. I was good with engines." After they finished eating, an employee brought in clothes from the hotel gift shop. Clean jeans, a button-up shirt, a light jacket, new socks, and sneakers. Michael showed Pete to a bathroom where he could change. Pete stared at himself in the mirror. First time he'd seen his reflection clearly in weeks. His beard was grayer than he remembered. His eyes looked older. But the clean clothes made him look almost normal again. Almost like the Pete Wilson he used to be. When Pete returned to the dining room, Michael was on the phone. He ended the call when he saw Pete. "Feel better?" Michael asked. Pete nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I don't know how to thank you." Michael waved away his thanks. "You returned $2,000 when you had every reason to keep it. That says a lot about your character." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. A different one this time. He wrote something on the back before handing it to Pete. "Meet me here tomorrow at 10 a.m., Michael said. "I want to continue our conversation, but I've got to get to my meeting now." Pete stared at the card. "Why? I mean, you already bought me dinner. You don't owe me anything else." Michael stood up, straightening his tie. "Sometimes people just need a chance, Pete. Maybe tomorrow we can talk about what kind of chance would help you most." As Michael walked Pete back through the lobby, people stared again. But this time, Pete stood a little straighter in his clean clothes. At the door, Michael shook Pete's hand. "Don't forget," Michael said. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Pete watched as Michael got into his waiting car. He couldn't believe what had just happened. A day that started under a bridge was ending with dinner with Michael Jordan, and plans to meet again tomorrow. For the first time in months, Pete felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. Pete didn't go back to his spot under the bridge that night. Instead, he used some of the money Michael had insisted he'd take for a cheap motel room. The bed felt strange after months of sleeping on concrete, but Pete was so tired he fell asleep anyway. The next morning, Pete woke up early. He showered again just because he could. Hot water was a luxury he'd missed desperately. He put on yesterday's new clothes, grateful they were still clean. At 9:30, Pete stood outside the address on the card, a restaurant called Emilio's. The place looked expensive, with white tablecloths visible through the windows. Pete hesitated, wondering if he should wait outside. But the morning air was chilly, so he gathered his courage and went in. "May I help you?" asked the host, eyeing Pete carefully. "I'm meeting Mr. Jordan at 10, Pete said, trying to sound confident. The host's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Of course! Mr. Jordan's table is always ready. Please follow me." Pete was led to a quiet table in the corner. The host pulled out a chair for him, which made Pete feel awkward. Nobody had ever pulled out a chair for him before. "Would you care for coffee while you wait, sir?" the host asked. "Yes, please," Pete said, amazed at being called sir. As Pete sipped his coffee, he looked around the restaurant. Business people in nice suits talked over breakfast. Everyone seemed so put together, so sure of their place in the world. Pete felt like an imposter. At exactly 10 o'clock, Michael Jordan walked in. People tried to act normal, but heads turned. Michael nodded at a few folks as he made his way to Pete's table. "Good morning, Pete," Michael said, sitting down. "Did you sleep well?" Pete nodded. "Better than I have in months. Thank you for the money for the motel." "You're welcome." Michael picked up a menu. "Hungry?" "Always," Pete admitted with a small smile. They ordered breakfast. Pancakes, eggs, bacon, sausage, toast, orange juice. Pete tried not to eat too fast, but everything tasted so good. "So," Michael said after they'd eaten a bit, "tell me what you'd do if you could get back on your feet." Pete sat down, his fork thinking carefully. "Find steady work. Get a small apartment. Nothing fancy. Just a place to call home. He paused. Maybe reconnect with my sister. What kind of work are you looking for? Anything really? Pete said. But I'm good with cars. Always have been. Used to fix up old engines for fun before he trailed off, not wanting to think about what came before. Michael nodded. I noticed you have a limp. Old injury? Pete looked down at his leg. Basketball, actually. College ball. Tore my ACL and never got it fixed right. You played college ball? Michael looked surprised. Pete nodded. Nothing big leaguer. Small state college. I was decent, though. Could have maybe gone somewhere with it if I hadn't gotten hurt. Their conversation was interrupted when a woman at the next table dropped her fork. It clattered to the floor near Pete's feet. Without thinking, Pete picked it up and handed it to her with a smile. Thank you, she said, then did a double take when she realized who Pete was sitting with. No problem, ma'am, Pete replied politely. Michael watched this exchange with interest. When the woman turned back to her meal, he said, You know what I notice about you, Pete? You're kind, even when life hasn't been kind to you. Pete shrugged, embarrassed. Doesn't cost anything to be decent to people. That's rarer than you might think, Michael said, especially when you're going through hard times. An Anne, in a sharp business suit, approached their table. Jordan, what a surprise running into you here. I was hoping we could discuss that endorsement deal. Michael held up his hand. I'm in the middle of a meeting, Carl. My office will call yours. The man looked confused, his eyes darting between Michael and Pete. A meeting here? Yes, Michael said firmly. An important one. After the man walked away, Pete said, You didn't have to do that. I know you're busy. Actually, I did, Michael replied, because this is important. For the next hour, they talked about Pete's life, his childhood in a small town, his time playing basketball, his years at the factory. Pete found himself sharing things he hadn't talked about in years. Can I ask you something personal? Michael said as they finished their second cups of coffee. Pete nodded. Why did you return my wallet? The real reason. Pete thought for a moment. Because it was yours, he said simply. Not mine. Taking something that doesn't belong to you doesn't make it yours. It just makes you a thief. Michael sat back in his chair, studying Pete. Even when you have nothing, especially then, Pete said quietly, when you have nothing material, sometimes your principles are all you have left. I couldn't afford to lose those, too. Michael's expression changed, like he'd made a decision. He pulled out his phone. I have a friend who owns a car repair shop. Actually, I'm an investor in his business. They're looking for an experienced mechanic. He looked up at Pete, interested. Pete's heart skipped a beat. Are you serious? Very. The job comes with decent pay and benefits. Frank's a good boss. Fair? Michael hesitated. There's one catch, though. Pete's hope dimmed a little. There was always a catch. You'd need a place to live, a permanent address. Michael set down his phone. So I've arranged for you to stay in an apartment I own. It's nothing fancy. 3 months rent-free while you get back on your feet? Pete couldn't speak. His throat felt tight and his eyes burned with tears he refused to let fall. Why? He finally managed to ask. Why do all this for me? Michael looked Pete straight in the eye. Because you did the right thing when it was hard. And I believe in second chances, he smiled slightly. Besides, I'm a pretty good judge of character. You're a good man who had bad luck. Sometimes, people just need an opportunity to turn things around. As they left the restaurant, Pete walking beside one of the most famous athletes in the world, he felt strange, like he was in a dream he might wake up from at any moment. But the piece of paper in his pocket with an address and a job interview time felt real. The full feeling in his stomach was real, and the strange, unfamiliar feeling growing in his chest was real too. It wasn't just hope anymore. It was the beginning of a new chapter. Pete didn't really believe Michael Jordan would come back. Why would someone so important waste more time on a homeless man? But at exactly 9 o'clock the next morning, Pete stood outside the motel anyway, his few belongings in a plastic bag. To his amazement, a black SUV pulled up right on time. The window rolled down to reveal Michael's familiar face. Morning, Pete. Ready to go? Pete nodded, still not quite believing this was happening. The driver got out and opened the back door. Pete hesitated before climbing in, worried about dirtying the spotless leather seats. "This is Tony," Michael said, gesturing to a man in the front passenger seat. "He's my business manager. He'll be helping us today." Tony turned around, offering his hand. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Wilson." "Just Pete is fine," Pete said, shaking Tony's hand. Nobody had called him Mr. Wilson in years. "We've got a busy day planned," Michael explained as the car pulled away from the curb. "First stop is some new clothes." 30 minutes later, Pete stood awkwardly in an upscale men's store. The sales associate measured him while Michael and Tony waited. "I don't need anything fancy," Pete whispered to Michael. "Just some basic stuff would be fine." Michael shook his head. "You're interviewing at Frank's shop tomorrow. You need to look the part." By the time they left, Pete had 3 new outfits complete with shoes, socks, and even a watch. He wore one outfit out of the store, feeling strange in the crisp new jeans and button-down shirt. "Next stop, haircut," Michael announced as they got back in the car. The barber shop was unlike any Pete had ever been to. The barber welcomed Michael like an old friend, and didn't seem surprised or judgmental about Pete's shaggy appearance. "Clean him up, Marco," Michael said, "but keep it natural, nothing too fancy." As Marco worked, Pete watched his transformation in the mirror. With each snip of the scissors and pass of the razor, more of his old self emerged from behind the wild beard and overgrown hair. "There he is," Michael said when Marco finished. "I knew there was a handsome guy under all that hair." Pete barely recognized himself. He looked normal, like someone who might have a job and an apartment, like someone with a future. "One more stop," Michael said as they left the barbershop. The car pulled up in front of a medical building. Pete's stomach tightened nervously. "What's this?" he asked. "Doctor's appointment," Michael explained. "I noticed you wincing when you walk. That knee needs looking at." Pete shook his head. "I can't afford." "It's taken care of," Michael interrupted. "Just let the doctor check you out, okay?" The doctor was kind and professional, examining Pete's knee carefully. She took x-rays and frowned at the results. "This old injury was never properly treated," she explained. "You need physical therapy, maybe even surgery down the road, but for now I'm prescribing anti-inflammatory medication and a proper knee brace." When they left the doctor's office, Pete had prescriptions, a knee brace, and follow-up appointments scheduled. "Thank you," Pete said quietly in the car. "I don't know what else to say." Michael nodded. "One last surprise for today." The SUV drove through downtown and into a residential neighborhood with tree-lined streets. It pulled up in front of a small apartment building that looked well-maintained but not fancy. "This is it," Michael said as they got out. "Third floor, apartment 3B. Pete followed Michael and Tony up the stairs, his heart pounding. Michael unlocked the door and stepped aside to let Pete enter first. The apartment was small but clean and bright. There was a living room with a couch and TV, a kitchen with a small table and chairs, a bathroom, and a bedroom. Everything was simple but decent. "It's furnished," Michael explained. "Nothing special, but everything works." Pete walked slowly around the space, touching the furniture like he couldn't believe it was real. A real bed, a real kitchen, windows with curtains. "This is too much," Pete whispered. "The apartment is yours for 3 months, Michael said. "Rent-free! That should give you time to save up for your own place if the job works out." Tony stepped forward, holding out a folder. "Here's everything you need to know. Address, keys, building rules. I've also included a prepaid debit card with enough money for groceries and necessities until your first paycheck." Pete took the folder with trembling hands. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Michael shook his head. "You already did. You reminded me that there are still good people in this world. People who do the right thing, even when it's hard." "The refrigerator and cabinets are stocked with basics," Tony added. "Your job interview is tomorrow at 10 o'clock a.m. The address and details are in the folder. I'll check in with you in a few days," Michael said, heading toward the door. "Frank's a good guy. Just be honest with him about your experience." After Michael and Tony left, Pete stood alone in the middle of the apartment, his apartment. He walked to the window and looked out at the street below. Normal people doing normal things. Now he was one of them again. Pete went to the refrigerator and opened it. Milk, eggs, bread, fruit, vegetables. Real food. He made himself a sandwich and sat at the kitchen table to eat it. A real table. A real chair. After eating, Pete took a long shower in his own bathroom. He put on fresh clothes from the dresser that now held his new wardrobe. That night, Pete lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about how much his life had changed in just 3 days. From sleeping under a bridge to having an apartment, new clothes, a doctor's care, and a job interview. All because he'd made the right choice when no one was watching. As Pete drifted off to sleep, he made himself a promise. Someday, somehow, he would find a way to pay this kindness forward. Pete woke up before his alarm the next morning. For a moment, he was confused by the soft bed and quiet room. Then he remembered this was his apartment now, at least for 3 months. Interview day, Pete said to himself as he got out of bed. He showered, shaved carefully, and put on his nicest new outfit. Dark blue pants, a light blue button-down shirt, and the brown leather shoes that still felt stiff and unfamiliar on his feet. He ate breakfast at his little kitchen table, still amazed by having real food in a real refrigerator. The auto shop was a 20-minute bus ride away. Pete left an hour early, not wanting to risk being late. He found the place easily. Franklin's Auto Repair, a large, clean garage with 6 bays and a small office attached. A bell jingled as Pete walked into the office. A middle-aged man with grease-stained hands looked up from the computer. "Help you?" the man asked. "I'm Pete Wilson. I have an interview with Frank at 10. The man's expression changed. "Ah, MJ's friend. I'm Frank." He extended his hand. "You're early. I like that." Pete shook Frank's hand, relieved by the warm welcome. "Thank you for seeing me, sir. Michael says you know cars," Frank said, getting straight to business. "How about you show me? Got a '98 Chevy out back that's giving me trouble." For the next hour, Frank tested Pete's knowledge. Pete identified parts, diagnosed problems, and explained how he would fix them. With each question, Pete felt more confident. This was what he was good at. This was what he knew well, Frank said finally, wiping his hands on a rag. "Michael was right about you. You really do know your stuff." Pete felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "Does that mean?" Frank nodded. "Job's yours if you want it. 40 hours a week to start. Health insurance kicks in after 90 days. It's not glamorous work, but it's honest." "I'll take it," Pete said immediately. "When can I start?" "Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock a.m. Sharp," Frank replied. "We'll start you on oil changes and tire rotations. See how you do. You prove yourself, we'll move you up to bigger jobs." Pete couldn't stop smiling as he rode the bus back to his apartment. He had a job, a real job with a regular paycheck. He stopped at a small grocery store and bought ingredients for a proper dinner. His first home-cooked meal in almost a year. That evening, someone knocked on Pete's door. He opened it to find Michael standing there. "I hear congratulations are in order," Michael said with a smile. Pete grinned. "Frank called you already?" "Said you're the real deal," Michael confirmed, stepping into the apartment. "I brought a little housewarming gift." He handed Pete a gift bag. Inside was a framed photograph of a basketball team. Pete recognized it immediately. His college team from 20 years ago. "How did you—" Pete looked up in confusion. Have resources," Michael said with a wink. "Thought you might want a reminder of your playing days." Pete set the photo on his small side table, throat tight with emotion. "Thank you for everything you did." "The hard part," Michael said. "All I did was open a door." Over the next few weeks, Pete settled into his new life. Each morning he woke up in his own bed, ate breakfast in his own kitchen, and went to his job at the garage. Each evening he came home tired but satisfied, cooked dinner, and relaxed in his small living room. Frank was a fair boss who recognized Pete's talent with engines. By the 3rd week, Pete was handling more complex repairs. His coworkers were decent guys who didn't care about his past. They only cared that he showed up on time and did good work. Pete started setting aside money from each paycheck. A little for rent once the 3 months were up. A little for a used car of his own someday. A little for emergencies. He went to his physical therapy appointments faithfully. His knee still hurt, but less than before. The doctor said he might always have a slight limp, but proper treatment was preventing further damage. Michael checked in every week or so, sometimes in person, sometimes by phone. Pete was touched that someone so important and busy would take the time. "Have you called your sister yet?" Michael asked during one visit. Pete shook his head. "Not yet. I want to be more settled first. Don't wait too long, Michael advised. Family's important. 1 month into his new job, Pete had an idea. He spoke to Frank about it after work. I want to help others like me, Pete explained. People who've fallen on hard times but want to work. I was thinking maybe we could train them here. Frank scratched his chin thoughtfully. Like an apprentice program? Exactly, Pete said, warming to his idea. Maybe start with one person, someone from the shelter. Give them a chance like I got. Frank considered it. Could work. We've been busy lately. Could use another pair of hands. Let me think about it. The next day, Frank agreed to give Pete's idea a try. But you'll be responsible for training them, he warned. This is your project. Pete spent his day off at the shelter where he used to sleep. It felt strange to walk in wearing clean clothes, with money in his pocket. Some of the men recognized him. Pete, man, you look good, his old friend Rye exclaimed. What happened to you? Pete told his story, finding the wallet, returning it, the chance Michael had given him. The men listened with varying degrees of hope and skepticism. So I talked to my boss, Pete concluded. He's willing to try training someone from here. It's entry-level, minimum wage to start, but it's a real job with real possibilities. 5 men expressed interest. Pete interviewed each one carefully, thinking about what Frank needed and who would benefit most. Finally, he chose Darnell, a young man who had lost his apartment after getting laid off from his factory job. Be at this address tomorrow at 7:30, Pete told him. Don't be late. Wear clean clothes. This is a real chance. Darnell nodded seriously. I won't let you down. That night, Pete called his sister in Ohio. The phone rang 5 times before she answered. Hello, Sarah, it's Pete, your brother. There was a long silence. Then, Pete, is it really you? Are you okay? I'm better than okay, Pete said, his eyes filling with tears. I've got a lot to tell you. 6 months passed quickly. Pete moved into his own apartment when the 3 months in Michael's place were up. It wasn't as nice, but it was affordable on his salary, and most importantly, it was his. He'd signed the lease with pride, his hands steady as he wrote his name. His relationship with his sister Sarah had grown stronger with each phone call. She'd even visited for a weekend, bringing photos of her kids that now sat on Pete's dresser beside the college basketball team picture. You should come for Thanksgiving, she'd said before leaving. The kids would love to meet their Uncle Pete. The thought of being Uncle Pete made him smile every time. At the garage, Frank had promoted Pete to lead mechanic. His talent with engines had impressed even the most experienced mechanics. Customers specifically requested Pete for complex problems, trusting his careful work and honest assessments. Darnell, the young man Pete had brought in from the shelter, was doing well too. He was reliable and eager to learn, reminding Pete of himself at that age. We should hire another apprentice, Pete suggested to Frank one afternoon. The program's working great, Frank agreed. And soon they had 3 former homeless men working at the shop, learning skills that would keep them employed for life. Pete still limped, but regular physical therapy had strengthened his knee considerably. He could even shoot a few baskets now without pain, something he demonstrated when Michael invited him to a charity basketball event. The event was at a community center in Pete's old neighborhood. Michael had started a foundation that provided sports programs, meals, and tutoring for kids in need. He'd named Pete as a community advisor, valuing his perspective and ideas. These kids need to see someone who grew up here and overcame challenges, Michael explained. Someone real. Pete had been nervous about returning to his old neighborhood, but the welcome was warm. Some people recognized him from his college playing days. Others knew him from his time on the streets. All seemed genuinely happy to see him doing well. After the event, Pete and Michael sat on bleachers watching kids play basketball on the newly refinished court. I wanted to talk to you about something, Michael said. How would you feel about managing a new auto shop? Pete turned to look at him. What do you mean? Frank and I are expanding the business, opening a second location across town. He thinks you're ready to run it. Pete blinked in surprise. Me? Run a shop? Michael nodded. You've got the skills, the experience, and most importantly, the character. You'd hire the staff, train them, manage the business. It would mean more responsibility, but also better pay. I don't know what to say, Pete admitted. Say you'll think about it, Michael suggested. Talk to Frank. He can explain the details better than I can. That night, Pete couldn't sleep. Manager of his own shop? It seemed impossible. Yet here it was. Another door opening. Another chance to move forward. He thought about where he'd been a year ago. Sleeping under a bridge. Hungry and hopeless. Now he had an apartment, savings in the bank, reconnection with family, and a career with real prospects. All because he'd found a wallet and made the right choice. The next day, Pete went to see Frank early before the shop opened. "Michael told you about the new location?" Frank asked. Pete nodded. "Do you really think I'm ready?" Frank leaned against a workbench. "Pete, you're the best mechanic I've got. But more than that, you understand people. You know what it means to struggle, to need a chance. That's why your apprentice program works so well." He handed Pete a folder. "These are the plans for the new shop. We're calling it Wilson's Auto Repair. Ed. Has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Pete opened the folder with shaking hands. There were blueprints for a garage even bigger than Frank's, with a training center attached. "The training center?" Frank smiled. "Michael's idea, a place to expand your apprentice program. Formal training for people who need a fresh start?" Pete felt overwhelmed. "This is too much. It's not charity," Frank said firmly. "It's business. Good business. You've proven the model works. Now we're investing in it and in you." That Sunday, Pete went to the homeless shelter again, this time with flyers about job training at the new shop. He served meals alongside volunteers, talking with the men and women about opportunities. "I was sitting right where you are last year," he told them. "Things can change. You just need skills and a chance." Some looked hopeful. Others seemed too beaten down to believe him. Pete understood both reactions all too well. As Pete was leaving, he noticed a familiar figure huddled in the corner. Rye, his old friend from under the bridge. "Rye, is that you?" Rye looked up, his face thinner than Pete remembered. "Pete Wilson, man. Look at you, all cleaned up and successful." Pete sat down. "What happened? Last I heard you had that dishwashing job?" Rye shrugged. "Place closed down. Been having trouble with my foot again. You know how it goes." Pete thought about the new training center. Still months from opening, but Rye needed help now. "How about coming home with me tonight? I've got a couch. Tomorrow we can talk to Frank about a position for you." Rye looked suspicious. "Why would you do that?" Pete smiled. "Because someone did it for me when I needed it. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person who believes in you." That night, as Rye slept on his couch, Pete watched a basketball game on low volume. At halftime, they showed a feature about Michael Jordan's community work. There was a brief clip of Pete helping kids with basketball drills, his slight limp barely noticeable. The announcer called him local success story Pete Wilson and briefly mentioned how he'd gone from homelessness to managing his own business. Pete shook his head in amazement. His own business, his name on a building, a chance to help others like him. He looked at Rye sleeping peacefully on the couch and whispered, "One day at a time, how you rebuild a life. One day at a time." 1 year after finding Michael Jordan's wallet, Pete stood in front of Wilson's Auto Repair, watching as workers installed the large sign bearing his name. The grand opening was set for the following week, and everything was nearly ready. Rye had been working at Frank's shop for 5 months now, his bad foot finally treated properly by the same doctor who had helped Pete. 3 other men from the shelter had joined the apprentice program. The training center wouldn't be finished for another month, but Pete already had a waiting list of applicants. "Oh, quite a team, isn't it?" Michael's voice came from behind him. Pete turned, smiling at his friend and mentor. "Still doesn't seem real." "My name on a building!" "Believe it," Michael said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You earned this." Pete. A sleek black car pulled up and Tony, Michael's business manager, stepped out. "Everything's ready for tonight," he told Michael. "The guest list is confirmed, the press has their invitations, and the caterers will arrive at 5 o'clock. Tonight was the charity gala for Michael's foundation. Pete had helped plan it, focusing on programs to help homeless adults find jobs and housing. But he hadn't expected Michael to make such a big deal of his role. "You sure you want me speaking tonight?" Pete asked nervously. "I'm not good at fancy events." Michael smiled. "That's exactly why you need to speak. These rich donors need to hear from someone who's lived it, not just celebrities talking about good causes." That evening, Pete stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie. The suit he wore was the first he'd ever owned, bought specifically for the gala. It fit perfectly, making him look like the business owner he was about to become. On his dresser sat the invitation embossed with gold lettering. The Michael Jordan Foundation presents a night of second chances. Pete still couldn't believe he was not just attending, but speaking. As Pete entered the grand ballroom of the Palmer Hotel, the same hotel where he'd first returned Michael's wallet, he felt a wave of memories. How different things were now. The doorman who had once tried to turn him away now welcomed him with a respectful nod. "Good evening, Mr. Wilson." The room was filled with well-dressed people, celebrities, business leaders, and philanthropists. Pete recognized many faces from TV and magazines. He felt out of place until Michael appeared at his side. "There he is," Michael announced to the small group he'd been talking with. "The man of the hour." Pete shook hands, made small talk, and tried to remember names. People seemed genuinely interested in his story and the apprentice program. A famous basketball player asked detailed questions about how the training center would work. A businesswoman offered to provide interview clothes for program graduates. When it was time for speeches, Michael took the stage first. He spoke about the foundation's work, then turned to Pete's story. "A year ago, a man found my wallet in a park," Michael told the crowd. "This man was homeless, hungry, and had every reason to take the $2,000 inside. Nobody would have known. Nobody would have blamed him." The room was silent. Everyone focused on Michael's words. But Pete Wilson didn't take a penny. He spent his last energy walking across town to return my wallet, simply because it was the right thing to do. Michael gestured for Pete to join him on stage. Pete walked up, his knee barely bothering him after a year of proper treatment. "Tonight I'm proud to announce our newest initiative," Michael continued, "Wilson's Way, a comprehensive program to help homeless individuals rebuild their lives through job training, housing assistance, and mentorship." The crowd applauded as a large screen displayed the program logo, a simple image of hands passing a wallet. "This program will partner with Wilson's Auto Repair opening next week to provide real-world training and job placement," Michael added excitedly. "And now I'd like Pete to tell you more about it." Pete stepped up to the microphone, nervous but determined. He spoke from the heart about his experiences on the streets, the challenges of rebuilding a life, and the importance of giving people not just help, but dignity and purpose. "When Michael helped me, he didn't just give me things," Pete explained. "He gave me a chance to help myself. That's what Wilson's Way is about, giving people the tools to rebuild their own lives, one day at a time." The crowd rose in a standing ovation when Pete finished speaking. People wiped away tears, reached for checkbooks, and lined up to offer support for the program. Later, as the formal part of the evening wound down, Pete found a quiet corner to catch his breath. Michael joined him, 2 glasses of sparkling water in hand. "You did great," Michael said, handing Pete a glass. "I think we raised enough tonight to fund the program for 3 years." Pete shook his head in amazement. "I never thought returning a wallet would lead to all this." Michael studied Pete thoughtfully. "You know, there's something I've been wondering. From the first time we met, you seemed familiar somehow. Did we ever meet before? Maybe at a basketball camp or game?" Pete hesitated. He had kept this secret for a year, wanting to make his own way without any special treatment. But now, with everything in place, perhaps it was time for the truth. "There is something I never told you," Pete admitted quietly. Michael raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Pete took a deep breath. "Can we talk somewhere more private?" Michael nodded, leading Pete through a side door onto a small balcony overlooking the city lights. The night air was cool and fresh after the crowded ballroom. "Before I became homeless," Pete began, "before the factory job and everything else, I played college basketball." Michael smiled. "I know that. You mentioned it before." "Yes, but I didn't tell you where or when." Pete leaned against the railing, gathering his courage. "I played for Eastern State, class of '99. Michael's expression changed, a flash of recognition crossing his face. "Eastern State?" Pete nodded. "I was teammates with your cousin Jamie for 2 seasons. Michael stared at Pete in disbelief. "You played with Jamie?" "We were roommates, actually. Best friends on the team." Pete reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a plastic sleeve containing an old, creased photograph. "I have carried this with me through everything. It's the only thing I never sold or lost." He handed the photo to Michael. The picture showed 2 young men in basketball uniforms, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. One was clearly a younger Pete. The other was unmistakably Michael's cousin. They called us the dynamic duo, Pete said softly. Jamie was the shooter. I was the playmaker. Coach said we had especially on the court. Michael touched the photo gently, his eyes fixed on his cousin's smiling face. Jamie talked about you, Pistol Pete. He called you. Pete smiled at the old nickname. That's right. He said you could have gone pro if not for your knee. Pete shrugged. Maybe. We'll never know. The injury happened during conference finals my junior year. Jamie was devastated. Blamed himself because he passed me the ball. Michael looked up from the photo. I remember that game. I was there. Jamie begged me to come see his amazing point guard in action. Michael shook his head slowly. I left at halftime. Had a flight to catch. Didn't even know you got hurt until Jamie called me later. The two men stood in silence for a moment, connected by the memory of Jamie, who had died in a car accident just a year after graduating college. I recognized you, Michael finally said. When you returned my wallet, I knew you looked familiar, but I couldn't place it. It's been over 20 years. I recognized you right away, Pete admitted, but I didn't say anything about Jamie or our connection. Why not? Michael asked. That might have made things easier for you. Pete straightened up, his voice steady. Because I wanted any help to come from what I did, not who I knew. And because... He paused. Because I was ashamed. Jamie always believed in me. Said I'd do great things. I didn't want you to know how far I'd fallen. Michael handed the photo back to Pete. Jamie would be proud of you now, not because you're successful again, but because you never lost your integrity, even when you lost everything else. Pete carefully returned the photo to his pocket. You know what's strange? When I found your wallet that day, I felt like Jamie was somehow behind it, like he was giving me one last assist. He smiled at the basketball metaphor. Michael nodded thoughtfully. Jamie always did have great court vision. Saw opportunities others missed. From inside, they heard Tony calling Michael's name. The formal photo session was about to begin. We should go back in, Michael said. But first, thank you for telling me about Jamie, about everything. Thank you for seeing something in me worth saving, Pete replied. Even before you knew who I was. As they walked back into the bright lights of the ballroom, Pete felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The secret he'd carried for a year was finally shared. The strange coincidence that had brought him and Michael together now made perfect sense. The wallet hadn't just been a wallet. It had been a bridge between past and present, between loss and hope, between two men connected by someone they had both loved and lost. Later that night, as photographers captured images of Michael Jordan and Pete Wilson standing together beside the Wilson's Way logo, neither man explained to the press the deeper meaning behind the name. That would remain their private truth. A reminder that some connections run deeper than chance, that some stories have beginnings long before we recognize them. And as Pete looked out at the crowd of people eager to support second chances for others, he felt Jamie's presence somehow still assisting, still believing, still making the perfect pass at exactly the right moment. Some might call it luck that Pete found Michael's wallet that rainy morning, but Pete knew better now. It wasn't luck. It was Jamie making one last perfect assist. That's it for today's story, friends. It's amazing how a single act of kindness can change everything, isn't it? Where are you listening from today? Drop your location in the comments. I'd love to know how far this story of hope and second chances has traveled. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. And if you want more stories that remind us of the power of kindness, subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us spread these messages of hope further. Remember, sometimes the smallest actions, returning a wallet, offering a helping hand, or simply believing in someone, can change a life forever. Until next time, keep spreading kindness wherever you go.